Derek never thought his life would change forever in an instant when a fateful fall during a triathlon left him unable to move his legs. The first weeks were filled with pain, anger, and despair, but mixed with the realization that he was not alone. Ashley, the woman who had been with him all along, did not leave. She not only stayed, but became his companion, his caregiver, his silent sacrifice during his darkest days. To ensure Derek received the best treatment, Ashley hired Shanice, a renowned physical therapist, whom she trusted both professionally and morally. The workouts began regularly, each small movement, each seemingly insignificant leg lift, the only hope of a return to normal life. However, after 3 months, things began to get strange. The most recent MRI and EMG neurological markers showed some signal conduction, a clear sign that Derek was likely to recover. But in the hospital system, the official medical records listed Derek's paralysis as permanent motor dysfunction, even mentioning the risk of permanent muscle atrophy. This did not match the observations Shanice had made during the therapy sessions: improved muscle tension during MMT, and improved balance reflexes on the Berg balance scale. Shanice found it strange, but did not want to give the patient unfounded suspicion, especially since the official records had not yet been updated positively. Still, an uneasy feeling clung to her, especially after she overheard a brief phone call between Derek and an unidentified person, in which Derek explicitly asked to keep the original records intact and not let anyone suspect anything. As time goes on, Derek's behavior becomes more and more inexplicable. He asks for shorter physical therapy sessions, shows more pain when Ashley is around, but accidentally straightens up when he doesn't realize Shanice is watching. And then the biggest question begins to form. Has Derek really regained his mobility, but is deliberately hiding it to maintain a favorable situation for himself? If he can really walk, then why is he pretending? Maybe Derek isn't afraid of the wheelchair, but of losing Ashley, the only person who has always stayed by his side when he's at his weakest. By maintaining the image of a man who needs to be cared for, protected, he's kept her by his side longer than he ever thought possible. And it becomes something he can't let go of, even if it means lying. But can true love be built on a foundation of pity and deception? Ashley was not one to be fooled, and when she accidentally accessed the system records and discovered that the EMG edit history had been overwritten the day she was away, just when Derek had requested full security access, she began to piece together the puzzle. She said nothing. She didn't scream, didn't confront, didn't cry. She just backed away. She watched Derek more, noting every little movement he made, every time he accidentally kicked his foot or kept his balance better when he thought no one was looking. She began missing therapy sessions, citing work as an excuse. And with each passing day, Ashley's silence became a silent accusation that Derek didn't dare ask directly. He sensed the change in her, the innocence in her eyes, the gentleness of her touch. Ashley still cared for him, was still punctual, still attentive, but something was broken, changed, irreparable. But why didn't she question it? Was she still trying to believe that it wasn't too late? Or was she waiting for Derek to confess, to save a last shred of respect? For Ashley, the silence wasn't forgiveness, but a final test, to see if Derek would choose to be honest or continue to hide. And Derek, instead of confessing, sank deeper into a spiral of lies. He began making up excuses, faking cramps, asking for painkillers, complaining of phantom pain, a common but hard-to-verify symptom in people with spinal cord injuries. Shanice, after a period of silence, began to dig through all the training data. She found that the biomarkers didn't match Derek's description. She recorded a few sessions in which Derek could clearly balance on his right leg for 1 to 2 seconds before falling. When she showed the recording to the chief physician, she didn't make any accusations, just asked, "Is it possible that the patient is recovering and the records haven't been updated?" But from there, things started to spiral out of control. An IT technician was abruptly reassigned after being caught illegally logging into the EMR. The man had an indirect connection to Derek's family through a sports foundation, When confronted, he remained silent. But too many pieces of the puzzle began to fit together. Ashley eventually decided to file a transfer to another independent rehabilitation unit, one with no personal connection. She stopped asking him because she knew enough. And one day in early fall, when Derek saw Ashley packing her things without a word, he realized that the price of keeping her with pity was losing true love. He may have won the battle against losing his ability to walk, but he had lost the battle to keep his faith. And when he got out of his wheelchair for the first time in an empty room, with no one watching him, no one caring, no one loving him for who he was, he understood that he had just traded the most sacred thing to prolong something that had long since died. Ashley's faith. She didn't need him to confess, because her silence was the clearest sentence he had ever received. And that was when Derek, who had been physically wounded, became a cripple of the soul. A man who could walk, but forever had no destination. In another development, Kat always thought of herself as a person who was good at controlling her emotions. A tough girl who was too used to living among secrets, lies, and hidden wars in the family. But what she saw that Friday afternoon brought the defenses she had built up over the past few months crashing down without warning. It had started by accident, as shocks often do, while searching for documents to complete a family history interview. Kat had wandered around the mansion, away from the hustle and bustle of the staff preparing for the Dupree Foundation board dinner. She hadn't meant to eavesdrop or snoop, but Tomas's familiar footsteps made her pause, and she ducked by the half-open door to the side office where old documents were usually stored. She hadn't meant to look, but the dim light from the door made it all so clear, as if it had been designed for her to see. Tomas and Eva, hand in hand, closer than was necessary for friendly conversation. He leaned down, whispered something that made Eva laugh, and then their lips met in a soft moment, not rushed, not furtive, but enough for Kat to know that something had changed. She felt pulled out of reality, and everything Tomas had said about just friends. There was nothing between him and Eva. Suddenly rang hollow. What hurt wasn't that she'd loved Tomas, that had long since become a muddled mess, but that she'd hoped he'd come clean, that someday, after all, he'd choose to be honest. And now it wasn't just disappointment, it was a silent insult. They'd thought she wouldn't find out. They thought she wasn't important enough to hide. Kat turned away, her throat tight, but that wasn't the end of it. As she headed down the south hallway to avoid Eva, she heard a soft laugh from the conservatory. Something about the sound made her pause. Ted's laugh. And with it, another sound, Leslie's sickly sweet voice. Kat crept forward, ducking behind one of the frosted glass doors, and saw a sight she would never forget. Her father, whom she'd always thought was still wounded by past betrayals, leaning toward Leslie, his gaze no longer as cold as it usually was. Leslie, in her silver blue dress, didn't seem reserved or wary. On the contrary, she seemed to enjoy the attention, the gaze, and the hand on her waist. The moment didn't last long, but it was long enough for Kat to feel like she'd just witnessed something worse than betrayal. Compromise. Ted had chosen to side with someone Kat deeply hated, someone who had trampled on everything her family stood for, someone she blamed for her mother's breakdown over the past year. She had thought that if anyone understood her, it was her father. But now, even he was no longer her rock. The betrayal she felt was not just from Tomas or Eva, but from within her own family. And for the first time in months, Kat had no place to hide her feelings. She walked quickly toward her room, her hands shaking with anger, not jealousy, but disorientation. She didn't know who to take it out on first. Tomas, who had denied everything they had shared. Eva, who kept saying we were friends. Leslie, who played the innocent but was clearly intruding on her family. Or Ted himself, who had chosen to turn a blind eye to everything in order to pursue a relationship he should have fought against. She wanted to scream, to tear apart the veil of hypocrisy that was covering this house. Instead, Kat remained silent, the silence of someone preparing for a big storm. She didn't say anything to her mother, not because she didn't want to, but because she didn't know where to start. If she told her mother what she had seen, would she believe her? Or would she try to defend Ted, as she had done with so many others in the past? Kat decided to wait. She needed to gather more evidence, needed to find out if the relationship between Leslie and Ted was just a passing fancy or something more serious. And most importantly, she needed to know what she was fighting for. Perhaps that moment of deep hurt would be the turning point that made Kat grow up faster. No longer the little detective who just observed and recorded, but someone brave enough to expose all the masks that existed in Fairmont Crest. Because when love turns to lies, when family becomes a hiding place, the truth is the only weapon left, and Kat, however hurt, will not back down. Little did anyone know that these individual moments would set off a devastating chain reaction, bringing to light the secrets each character had long kept hidden. As Derek grapples with his own dark choice to hide his recovery, creating a facade of pity to keep Ashley by his side, Kat is confronted with a reality that leaves her feeling utterly disoriented. Little did they know that their secrets, though different in form, shared a common thread: emotional manipulation, loyalty, and the illusion of true love. As Derek constructs a world of lies to keep Ashley imprisoned by his illness, Kat watches as the father she adores begins to slide into an emotional abyss with a woman she hates, completely destroying the fragile structure of trust between them. There is a subtle intersection between the two stories. Ashley, as she gradually discovered the anomalies in Derek's recovery behavior, she began to back away, searching for answers herself rather than confronting them directly. And in a seemingly random moment, when she visited the mansion to talk to Ted about a medical donation for the rehab center, she caught Kat in a different state than usual, her eyes hard, her voice strained, her hands clenched in her pockets. Ashley didn't ask, but she knew the feeling because she lived it every day. The feeling of being betrayed by the person she once trusted the most. The coincidence didn't bring them closer together immediately, but it planted the seeds of an invisible bond. And then, when Ashley returned to the center where Derek was still playing the perfect game, she happened to receive a revised report on Shanice's neuromusculoskeletal recovery history, which clearly mentioned that the reflexes had exceeded the baseline but were cleared from the system after only a few hours. This makes Ashley understand that deception is no longer a theory, but a carefully concealed truth. Just as Kat is suffering when she discovers Tomas's intimate gestures with Eva, a person she once thought was a friend, once believed was nothing to Tomas. So Ashley is swallowing the bitterness that the man she cared for, sacrificed for, and trusted uses pity to keep her. One by one, each trust is crumbling during the late fall days at Fairmont Crest. And even though no one says anything, every look, every step, every distance during shared dinners begins to speak volumes. Kat, instead of exploding, begins to write everything down, creating a silent diary. Recording the date and time Tomas leaves the house, the moment Eva disappears from the camera, even the time her father leaves his office and the dim light from the greenhouse. Meanwhile, Ashley silently compared the EMG scans to old training clips, printing out frame-by-frame images that showed Derek's legs had the reflexes and muscle strength to stand unsupported. Neither woman spoke, but their silence became the loudest voice. The voice of those who knew the truth but were waiting to see if the other would have the courage to admit it. But then, in an unexpected twist, Kat, while checking the security cameras for her school project, discovered an unclassified clip in her temporary folder. A clip of Derek standing up, walking through the hospital hallway to get something from the pharmacy, before returning to his wheelchair and pretending he had never moved. Kat immediately recognized the value of the clip, and for the first time she had a chance to turn the tables. Not because she cared about Derek, but because she knew what it felt like to be lied to be taken for granted, and she didn't want anyone else to suffer the way she did. She didn't send the clip to Ashley, didn't give it to Shanice, but gave it directly to Ted, the father she was still angry with but still hoped would do the right thing. In a silent room, without explanation, Ted watched the clip and realized that the dishonesty in this house was no longer about power or money, but had seeped into every personal relationship. And that's when things began to change. Ashley was called into a private meeting, where she didn't have to ask any more questions, because the evidence was there. She didn't cry, didn't get angry, just turned to Kat, nodded slightly. A recognition that amid all the wrongs, at least one person was willing to face the truth. And in that look, Kat found what she thought she had lost. The belief that the truth, however painful, still has value. She was still angry with Tomas, still unforgivable about Ted, but she knew she was no longer alone. And for Ashley, it was the last day she walked into Derek's room, not as a lover or a caretaker, but as a woman choosing freedom over false pity. The two stories, seemingly separate, were now bound together like two rivers flowing into the same sea, where lies would be swallowed and only courage would keep people alive.